is practical. Let me now introduce Jim Dwyer, current president of Skull International USA, who will make some opening remarks and continue with introductions. Jim?
Thank you very much, Eric, and welcome everyone. Eric pretty much said it all. This is a continuation of our webinar series, which we started a year ago, January. It's intended to enlighten everyone in Skull and non-Skull alike on what's happening in our industry. Today we feature Chuck Thackston from ARC, again, who will talk about the airline industry. We also, and I believe July 14th, will have a great webinar with Roger Dow and Christine Duffy. So put that on your calendars as well. So as I said, Eric pretty much explained what's going on today. We thank you all for attending. Talk this up if you can with your colleagues and colleagues in the industry. We would like to not only have Skull members on these webinars, but it's also beneficial to non-Skull members. So without any further ado, let me introduce our webinar hostess, Morgan Maravich, who will do the interviewing, and Chuck Thackston from ARC. Morgan, Chuck.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Chuck Thackston from ARC. Chuck spends time doing in-depth research on industry trends and market moves to track the progress of the air travel industry as it continues to evolve. He's the principal on the innovation and analytics team at ARC, championing the creation, incubation, and development of new ideas. After leading the company's program to consolidate global ticketing data into ARC's core data asset, Chuck spends his time creating and researching new ways to leverage ARC's fast air ticketing data and travel intelligence to increase analytics opportunities for ARC customers. Chuck brings over 30 years of technology experience to ARC with leadership roles in engineering, analytics, marketing, and product development. His prior experience includes work in healthcare, airline, and technology service industries at Travelport, WorldSpan, Sabre, EDS, and American Airlines. Welcome, Chuck.
Thanks, Morgan.
Delighted to have you with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you and be able to share some of the information that we're seeing here at ARC and kind of what the recovery is looking like. So what I want to do today is a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and share some material that will allow us to kind of walk through and see what the numbers are showing. The information that we're going to be showing today is a little bit of data knowledge. So a little bit of data, a lot of numbers, some perspective on kind of what we're seeing, but I'm also going to put these numbers into context a little bit. And that context is allowing you to kind of better understand what the data is, where we've come from, where we're going, and what it means for today's numbers. Statistics have been floated around a lot over the last couple of months about, these statistics are here, these mean that. So I want to make sure that we can kind of put things in context and understand what the data means versus just showing you the raw numbers. So really, what ARC data is and where we're pulling these numbers is airline ticketing data. ARC has a partnership with IATA, and that pulls in data from around the world. We also have data that is contributed to ARC from over 100 airlines around the world. So the net of all that is, in 2019, for example, we saw over 2 billion passenger trips in our data across 234 countries, thousands of airports, and 90,000 travel agencies. We highlight the travel agencies because we have a lot of really good information on travel agency activity. However, we also have direct sales from most of the major airlines around the world. So we get a very broad perspective on what's going on in the industry. And what I'm going to show you today is, again, a little bit of context on the data, what the data means, as well as what we're seeing going into the near and midterm future. So let's look at the data real quick. And a lot of the data that we're going to look like is compared to a baseline of 2019. A lot of the data and the facts that are quoted out there are based on, how close are we to 2019? How quickly are we recovering? That sort of thing. But I'd like to also point out, and this slide kind of shows this directly, 2019 for air travel was a very good year. This chart shows 2015 through 2019, and every year before 2019, we were starting to gain momentum. We were selling more tickets, more people were flying, more people were traveling. So when we compare our numbers to 2019, keep in mind that 2019 was a very, very good year, and it's a pretty high hurdle to meet. Doesn't mean we can't meet it, and we're headed in that direction for sure. But I wanted to put things into a bit of context to say if we're, a little bit below 2019, that may or may not be a bad thing. The green lines on the bottom here are showing the growth from 2015 to 2019. So we had about a 20% increase in airline ticketing around the world between 2015 and 2019. So that's a pretty good jump. And that's what we're going to be comparing it to in 2019 as a baseline. So given that context, let's see where we are with the recovery at this point. This is for US travel and shows ticketing starting back in 2020 and then going through the first few weeks of June in 2021. Obviously, 2020 started out very good. We were even ahead of those 2019 levels for several weeks. And then March and April happened. And in March and April, we took a very dramatic dive. This is not really new news, but to put things kind of in perspective on where we were, we dropped to 93% off the prior year. So ticketing essentially dried up. People were not sure where to go, destinations were closing, restrictions were being implemented, and it went down very, very quickly. But we've had sort of a swoop recovery, if you will, in that once we hit that trough, it's been coming up fairly steadily since that point. And as of the most recent weeks, we are seeing ticketing activity down about 31% from 2019 levels. And again, 2019 was a very good year, but we're back up to being off only about 30%. And the trend is clearly positive. We are working our way toward a recovery to 2019 levels fairly quickly. Now, it doesn't happen every week. Some weeks are off, some weeks are on, but it's gone very, very steadily up. This is a general number. So this is the number that we're seeing for all ticketing activity. But that ticketing recovery and air travel recovery has been uneven. For example, one thing that ARC monitors fairly closely is where people are traveling. So where are people going to? Where are people coming from? Who's up, who's down? So this chart shows by state in the US, how many people are traveling to that state. So back in February, end of February 2020, most states were up. And we see a few states here in red, but that's just sort of a weekly anomaly. This is for 1 week's worth of ticketing compared to 2019, and most states were up. So things were going very, very well in the first couple of months of 2020. Only 8 weeks later, compared again to 2019, ticketing fell off dramatically. Every single state, every single region of the country was off by 75 to 95% of ticketing volume. So that hit very, very quickly, and things shut down very, very rapidly. But looking at this at the state level, I mentioned things are not recovering evenly across every state. If you look at where we are in the last week of May, we are definitely seeing some positive recovery in the Rocky Mountain states as well as the Southeast, and even in Maine and Hawaii and Alaska. We are seeing ticketing levels that are above 2019. Some states are not yet recovering up to that level. On the Mid-Atlantic, California, and the Midwest, they are lagging a bit, but a lot of that has to do with business travel lagging, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. So even though the recovery is uneven, the recovery is happening around every single destination in the US. Now, that has to do with pent-up travel demand. People have been wanting to travel. They have been needing to travel in some cases. So that pent-up travel demand is starting to realize itself and being shown in each state's destinations. Also, as destinations are opening up, as restrictions are being lifted, and people are starting to plan their holiday trips and take summer vacations, that's also being reflected in the data that we see. So some very positive news here on travel within the US across most states. But let's look at international travel and where people are going traveling outside of the US when they leave the country. Now, it may be a surprise, but international travel has not been that far off domestic travel. So as domestic travel has started to recover, international travel, or travel from the US to other countries, has also started to recover almost at the same rate. However, where people are traveling is very different. This is a view of where people traveled in 2019. When they left the United States, about 30% were going to the Americas, about another 30%, a little bit less, were going to Europe. Asia Pacific and the Caribbean were each getting about 20% of the international travelers departing the US. However, year to date in 2021, that has shifted fairly significantly. The Americas, being South and Central America as well as Canada, has grown about 10% in their share of international travelers from the US. The Caribbean is up dramatically, gaining quite a bit of share. About 15% more of the travelers leaving the US are going to the Caribbean. It's close to home and it's a good place to vacation. Asia Pacific and Europe are down dramatically. People wanting to stay closer to home, plus restrictions in both Asia and Europe have been there and are remaining in place for a longer period of time than some states and for domestic travel. Now, recently, Europe has announced that they are starting to open up. A number of countries are starting to welcome US guests or US travelers back again, which is a good thing. And as those restrictions start to get lifted, you're going to see some increasing trends in outbound international travel. And we're already seeing that to some extent. The Caribbean, as I mentioned a moment ago, is well over 2019 levels already. They have been over 100% of 2019 for several months now, as people are traveling closer to home and taking advantage of the Caribbean travel. The other thing this chart shows is the Americas are recovering fairly well as the Caribbean is, and Europe over the last month or so has started to accelerate fairly steadily. Europe was down for the first quarter of 2020 or 2021, but over the last month or so has really started to increase as tourism has started to open up. Places like Greece are restarting their tourism programs to get people to come to the southern Mediterranean. The other thing to note here is Asia Pacific has only recovered to about 20% of 2019 levels. Asia is not recovering as dramatically. People are moving, or people are wanting to travel closer to home, and there are still restrictions and, quite frankly, health and safety apprehension from some travelers going to Asia. So let's turn this around a little bit and see where people are coming to the US from. So these are inbound travelers to the US. And this is showing sort of ticket volume, so you can see where most of the tickets are being sold for non-US travelers traveling to the US. Not really a huge surprise. Most of those travelers are still from the Americas. Now, I will note here that I broke out Canada and Mexico from the Americas. So that top blue line does not include Canada and Mexico, obviously large markets for travelers to the US. But the Americas in Central and South America are still showing a significant number of tickets inbound to the US. Europe as well is showing some pretty good growth over the last several months as far as tickets to the US. Now, that growth is not only reflective of European travelers being welcomed back into the US, but it's also reflecting Europe is a large market of travelers to the US, both leisure and business travelers. And business travel is starting to recover as well. One interesting note here, the green line near the bottom has taken a very strong spike over the last couple of weeks, and that is travel from Canada to the US. So these are not people traveling, but people purchasing tickets to travel in the future. And generally that's within a few months. So we have seen a pretty good spike of travelers buying tickets from Canada to the US. Now, the expectation there is that the borders will open up and that travel will be allowed and be a lot more flexible as it has been in the past. Now, recent announcements have put that border opening back to the end of July, but hopefully that will open up very, very quickly. And we can see those travelers returning to the US. The final thing I'll note on this chart is there is a blue line across the very bottom of this chart. That is travel from China to the US. It is practically non-existent at this point. And if we look at year-to-date inbound tickets to the US, that far right-hand side shows that 1% of the tickets that we sold in 2019 for China travelers to the US have been sold so far this year. That inbound Chinese tourism market is practically non-existent at this point. Now, the left side of this chart shows that the Americas, Mexico, the Caribbean are recovering very nicely. Mexico even above 2019 levels, while the Caribbean and the rest of the Americas is about 2/3 recovered. The other thing is, I mentioned Canada on the last chart. We have only sold 8% of the tickets inbound from Canada this year versus 2019. So Canada still has a long way to go, especially versus our next door neighbor to the south, which is Mexico. Hopefully, again, those will pick up very, very quickly. So this is kind of how things have looked for inbound travelers, for outbound travelers from the US and to the various states. So overall, the recovery is coming along very, very well. However, let's take a minute and look at some characteristics of the trips to give you a little bit more insight into how people are traveling and what purchase travel or what they're seeing when they purchase travel. One thing ARC tends to look at is corporate travel versus leisure and online travel. Clearly, leisure travel has been leading the recovery. Leisure travel is up to only off about 20% from 2019 levels. And as we saw in our first chart, we have seen a over 20% increase since 2015. So off by only 20% is in a very, very good place. Now, as that starts to approach 2019 sales levels, the demand may sort of level out. That's okay. But that recovery on the leisure and online side is very much leading the way. Now, corporate travel is taking a while to recover, but clearly a positive trend there and only off by 66% at this point from 2019 levels. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, businesses have to open up. As more businesses start to open up, people start to go back to their offices, we will see that corporate travel number continue to increase. There's also an economic factor there. Some businesses are continuing to economically recover from the impact of the pandemic. So that travel budget needs to be in place for people to travel. But again, we're starting to see some very, very positive signs on the corporate side, and we expect that to continue to gradually grow over the next several months. I want to talk a little bit about advanced purchase as well. This is a historical view of advanced purchase to give you, again, a little bit more context on what the data actually means. This was for 2017 through 2019. So pre-pandemic numbers on average advanced purchase days. The reason I wanted to show these 3 years is the patterns for things like advanced purchase haven't changed dramatically in a number of years. What we see here is advanced purchase days in first quarter tend to be longer than advanced purchase days the rest of the year. That is because business travelers are planning conventions that they're going to attend. Families are creating plans for their holidays, summer vacations, spring break. So those sort of advanced purchase to get the best deals happen in the first quarter. And then we see a bit of a falling off towards summer when fewer travelers are making plans. And it also is skewed more toward business travel, where that advanced purchase tends to be a little bit less. So this is what advanced purchase tends to look like or has historically looked. Now, if you compare that to what happened in 2020, we saw a very large swing in advanced purchase. So in the April-May timeframe, this is when many people were saying, some of which are on this call, it's only going to last a few months. So planning for travel later in the year should be fine. Go ahead and buy your tickets. Airlines were dropping fares. They were trying to stimulate demand. So we saw a fairly high spike in advanced purchase in 2020. And that's what you see in that green line with the mountain spike in April and May. Now, once things started to deteriorate, the pandemic started to take hold, we saw that average advanced purchase drop considerably to around 33 to 35 days advance on average. And that was for people needing to travel at the last minute. They were putting off their plans. There was no reason to really book in advance because there was plenty of supply. There were seats available because not many people were traveling. So we saw that advanced purchase being very much up, then very much down in 2020. Interestingly, in 2021, we started out where we left off in 2020, and first quarter was much lower. Interestingly, we are seeing that curve start to normalize. So the curve for 2021 on advanced purchase behavior is starting to look like what we have seen historically. Does that mean we are returning to, quote, normal? It means that behaviors are starting to return to what we saw pre-pandemic, more of a normal cadence across business travelers as well as leisure travelers. Looking at this a little bit differently, and I'm not going to go too much into advanced purchase here, but this is breaking up advanced purchase into tiers. 0 to 7 days, 8 to 21 days. So this gives us a view of when people are purchasing their travel. And it tends to be fairly normal. This was our historical norms in 2017 through 2019. You see that long advance purchase on the left-hand side, and then it sort of levels out. This is what we saw historically for many, many years. Looking at this in 2020, it got very chaotic. And this is just another view of how people were buying travel. And it was very, very hard to predict what people were going to do, when to stimulate demand, when to shore up your supply, if you will. Very chaotic in 2020. But here's another positive sign we're seeing, and this is May data for 2021. Historical segmentation of advanced purchase is what we see on the left. That is, how many or what percentage of tickets are short-term, mid-term, and long-term as far as advanced purchase. That's what we've seen historically, and on the right, what we saw in May of 2021. So the good news here is not only is the recovery happening, but the recovery seems to be channeling people back into their pre-pandemic travel behaviors. This is advanced purchase, and we're starting to see this on other dimensions of travel as well. Finally, I'll close with talking about average ticket prices. A number of stories in the media lately about airfares rising, ticket prices becoming much more expensive, and it's time to buy now versus waiting. What we've seen, and this is the average ticket price by week starting in 2019. So during 2019 and the early parts of 2020, there was not a huge fluctuation. You see a little bit of fluctuation toward the end of the year, but we were hovering around $450. Now, this is for all travel, US domestic. So it includes premium travel, last minute travel, basic economy travel, all travel kind of mixed in together, but it's a good proxy for what people are paying for their tickets. And in the 2019, early 2020 timeframe, it was fairly steady, about $450 a ticket. Now, when the pandemic started to take hold, you see a significant drop. We even dropped below $300 as an average ticket price at one point. Now, there's a lot of things that were causing that to happen. Less business travel, less demand overall. There were not a lot of people traveling. Skewed more toward a longer term advance purchase. Airlines were trying to stimulate demand. So we saw that precipitous drop in the April timeframe of 2020. Then it came up a little bit and started to level out in the low 300 range. In the fall, when we started to see a bit of a recovery, fares started to go back up. But then in 2021, the recovery really started to kind of get a good velocity, if you will. As the recovery happened, we started to see those airfares track along with the recovery. So as demand increased, average ticket prices have tended to increase as well. Basic economics, supply and demand, more demand with essentially a fixed supply, you're going to see those airfares rise. So those news reports about air travel becoming more expensive are true according to the data that we've seen. However, we are still below 2019 norms. So this is showing the normal average ticket price for 2019 as well as 2021. A steady rise in 2021. However, it is still remaining below 2019 average ticket price levels, which is a good thing. Airfares have tended to go down over the last several years. Air travel is a good bargain, but it is not yet up to what we saw in 2019, which is a good sign. Now, people are starting to buy tickets. That demand is starting to increase fairly dramatically, and airlines are even constrained in some markets by not having enough seats available. All those things will cause those average ticket prices to tend to rise a little bit. Still a good deal though, however, and looking at approaching that 2019 level, and it's probably going to level off there sometime in the near future. So that was all the prepared material I had. So I'm going to stop showing all sorts of wonderful pictures.
That was some
more going to come back.
That was some wonderful data that you shared, Chuck. And it looks like a recovery is all but real based on what you shared, and it's getting very close. So how long do you think the industry will sustain with this pace of recovery?
Well, we're starting to approach 2019 levels, so that's a good thing. Once the recovery is, quote, done, are we going to revert to normal levels of travel that we saw pre-pandemic in 2019? I think we're going to see a normal growth pattern. As I showed on one of those slides at the beginning, we've seen growth 2015, 2016, 2017. Travel is continuing to expand. The pie is getting bigger. But I think that's going to kind of return, if you will, once the recovery gets to kind of done, if you will. I'm not sure what that means. Now, international travel as well as corporate travel still have some catching up to do, and that's going to take a while for a number of reasons that we talked about. But it's bound to level off once we get to some of those historical levels that we saw pre-pandemic. We would expect the pace of that recovery to return to normal growth patterns, I think.
So you mentioned corporate travel and coming back, and being myself on the business travel side, we know that it's been slow to come back for the reasons that you had mentioned, and a few others as well. What are you seeing? Like, will it ever come back to where it was, or are we going to see a lot fewer business travels in the future? We know that there's been a lot of different predictions that have been set out there from even back to last year. So I guess,
Right.
What are you seeing from your side of the aisle?
So it's kind of funny. There are a lot of opinions out there, as you know, Morgan. There was a well-known Microsoft executive who shall remain nameless that was very pessimistic on business travel return. I tend to be a little bit more optimistic for a couple of reasons. There are some business trips that are not going to come back. That 3-day trip across the Atlantic for a 2-hour meeting is probably not coming back. However, we probably didn't need to do that anyway. What I do see coming back is there's, collaboration and innovation, team building, getting to know your customers, and being able to travel and really understand kind of what's happening out there in your business can't be done virtually. That kind of thing can't be scripted. So that kind of travel is going to come back. There are some economic factors that'll throttle that for a little while, but we do, or at least I personally think that's going to come back. Interestingly, there's another kind of dimension that's come through from the pandemic, and that is a more scattered workforce. A number of people have relocated. There are a number of large companies that said, don't come back to the office, working virtual is fine. And as those people have scattered, it's actually going to increase the need for team travel within a company. So because of the pandemic, we have accelerated the ability to meet virtually, like we're doing here. And that's going to be in great shape for a number of use cases. But there's also going to be more travel in some cases with teams having to get together as they've dispersed over the pandemic. So I'm much more optimistic on travel than some others that have made some predictions. It is going to come back, but it is going to take a little while to do that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, from the figures that we've been seeing, is it's kind of to what you said about people starting to come back to their offices, and you're seeing that Q3, Q4 this year, and even next year. I think that is really when you'll start to see how it's going to come back and where it's coming back. So as you noted, this is different times in travel. So how are things going to return and to how things were pre-pandemic, and what does that new normal look like?
As far as sort of returning to quote normal, there are things that have emerged during the pandemic as far as travel that are probably going to remain, and that may not be a bad thing. Scott McCartney with the Wall Street Journal commented a few months ago that he got on an airplane and it was the cleanest airplane he had seen in years. So extra cleaning protocols that focus on health and safety by the airlines is not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I expect that to continue for some period of time. The other thing that we're seeing is if you've traveled recently at the airport, there's a lot more technology for things like touchless transactions and being able to expedite boarding and things like that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that we have picked up new habits. So I think those are actually going to be really good things. Are people going to want to travel? Absolutely. And that will return.
Yeah, I went through the face scan boarding in Detroit, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't realize that they had already implemented it. So it was a very easy, fluid process. So yeah, to your point, it's a lot more touchless features, which I'm liking. And even a lot of the hotels that did not have like the digital check-in, a lot of them have put that through their apps. So there's been a lot of good tech things that have come out of this. And to your point, I really am enjoying the extra cleanliness that has happened. So I hope that part never goes away.
So I think some things are going to persist, but again, not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, so as we're talking about like hotels and other things, what are the ways hotels and other destination-focused companies, how can they use the information that you're providing? Because I know we have a variety of different folks that are tuning in today. How can they use this information to help them with their business?
So one of the things that Morgan, we were just talking about is, this sort of return to normal. Travel patterns and travel behaviors are going to be different for some period of time. We talked about things like advanced purchase. We looked at things that I didn't show here, but we've got some data on where people are traveling as far as how far from home, how quickly do they want to return, is that bleisure, spend the weekend there still in play, if you will. We're taking a look at a lot of those things, and I would encourage people that are looking at the data to really focus on what are we seeing happening out there that could change the way they're stimulating demand, the way that they're marketing their products, the timing of when they want to market their products. Do we want to really push on maybe online advertising 3 weeks out or 6 weeks out? Those kinds of patterns that we've seen historically are probably going to be different for some period of time. So using the data to find out where people are going, how they're purchasing, how they want to travel is really a very strong use of the data, and will probably get you the most bang for the buck. In fact, short commercial, ARC put something out there called ARC Travel Demand last year that you can get on our website and take a look at. But it basically allows very easy access to the data. Historically, ARC's data has been available to airlines, large agencies, that sort of thing, but we wanted to make that data more available to smaller companies to be able to get to that data very quickly for what they need. So we put this product called ARC Travel Demand out there to enable that, so we can provide that data to a lot broader audience, and hopefully they can get some good benefit out of it.
That's fantastic, and I'll be honest, I've used some of that data before, and it's phenomenal. And the charts that you showed, so the United States that was in green, just to provide reference, in the different months that Chuck showed, you can go all the way back and all the way forward, and it shows you the progression over time. So definitely some really good data points that you all provide. I'll be honest, when you kicked off your presentation and you started talking about the international markets, and then you dove into the numbers with China, I felt like my jaw was about to drop, because I knew that we weren't getting much visitation from China, and then I knew that how the numbers were skewed from the different international travel to the different international destinations. But I didn't really realize it till I saw the numbers. So I guess how did you, seeing those trends coming out, how did you see that? And I guess how are you seeing it going forward as you're seeing the trends come in?
So one of the things that I expect to see is we're going to see much more travel as destinations open up. And we've seen that in the US, and the state maps that I showed over the last several months, we've been watching that very closely. And as New York starts to open up, that starts to get more green. Florida was one of the earlier states to open up, and it turned green sooner. I believe we're going to see some of that same behavior internationally. Now, one of the things that I would also point out is the rules are going to change. The rules are still very, very volatile around the world, and even around the US to some extent. Each jurisdiction, whether it be state, local, national, regional, has their own set of rules. So there isn't this one common set of rules that is out there to say this is how we want to manage things. So knowing what those rules are is really going to help travelers going forward. That's one of the things, and at GBTA, obviously you are very familiar with this. That's one of the things that travel agencies can help a lot with. They understand where those rules are. They understand the sources to go to get the best rules. I read it on the internet, so it must be true, is probably something to be skeptical about at this point. But those travel agencies can help out with that. But to your point, I think as destinations start to open up, restrictions start to get lifted, there will be a little bit of a lag in some cases before travelers feel safe and confident to travel to some areas. but I do think it's going to happen very, very quickly. We've already started to see that in Spain and Greece, for example, with travelers really wanting to get back to the Mediterranean.
I was just going to ask, were there any that you saw like a really rapid rise when things started open? So because I've already seen quite a few people already popping over to Greece now that it's been open. So those are two great examples. Yeah. So you had mentioned about ticket pricing, and there has been a lot of reports about the ticket prices rapidly rising. And I know I've purchased a few, and I was expecting the COVID rates of the $300, and I had no such luck, unfortunately. And you did talk about that, but is it really going to continue when you're talking about it reaching that 2019 level? Is it really going to be expensive, or is it going to hit those rates, or is it just a temporary spike?
Yeah, my standard disclaimer, each airline is going to set their own prices. We have no visibility into airline pricing strategy, and each one is going to set their own rules. That said, what we have seen is the longer term trend has been for, a much higher value in air travel. And that value could be in things like basic economy, or it could be in premium economy if you want a little bit more comfortable travel. So those kind of things I think are going to continue. The other thing that we've seen is a number of airlines are really focusing now on that customer experience, making sure that not only you feel safe traveling with that airline, but that experience is much more seamless. And being able to focus on that is going to make air travel not only much more accommodating, but also much more affordable as they put technology in and those kind of things. Also, competition is going to continue to, put downward pressure on prices. We've seen a couple of new airlines start in the U.S. just within the past couple of months. Breeze as well as Avilo have started and they're starting to, impact the markets that they're in. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and you've seen some of the airlines take up different routes and different routings, and so it's definitely becoming different times. It's interesting to see that. Anyone that's tuned in, if you have any questions for Chuck, please feel free to submit them in the question box, and we'll get those over to him while we're continuing to ask him some questions. So feel free, if you're part of a SCAL club, please let us know so that we can recognize the club that you're a part of. But definitely, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to shoot them in that box. So as we know, there's many different facets to the travel industry, and Chuck, I know you've been in quite a few of them, so you're quite familiar. But the information you provided us gave us an excellent overview of what's going on in the air industry today, and even over the prior years before that. What are your thoughts overall on the recovery in other parts of the industry?
One of the things that I think is going to happen, Morgan, is destination-centered segments of the industry, such as hotels, ground transportation, tourism sites, even cruises, will start to ramp up as those local restrictions continue to be loosened and continue to kind of make things more broadly available to travelers. I think that's going to be the key to making things happen. And I've talked to some of my friends on the hospitality side, and they're already seeing ADR as well as occupancy rates at the hotels really start to accelerate in areas that are opening up. So one of the things that you asked earlier about our data, one of the things that our data will show is sort of that forward-looking view of where people traveling in July, where are people traveling toward the Labor Day weekend. And that helps people in the hotel industry as well as some of the destination markets such as Vegas and Florida to better predict what that demand is going to be. How many travelers are we going to see? That sort of thing. So I think the key factor there is going to be the opening up and the loosening of restrictions at the local level.
Absolutely. A key question that's come in from two folks, I will kind of three, and as we know, it's a hot topic in the industry today, and also I'd say countrywide is jobs in the industry, and I should say the lack of workforce. And both Pam Inman and Kathleen France have touched on this. What do you foresee about jobs in the airline industry? And many of the airlines, I'm trying to find workers with the shortages that are going on. With the lack of workforce and also with the routings and them needing, now when you're talking about supply and demand, there's clearly a growing demand, so them having to then add more supply.
Yeah, the the labor management at the airlines, as far as making sure they have enough staff and those kind of things, has really been a challenge. Airlines have tried their best to keep as many staff on site or on their teams as possible, for a couple of reasons that make it a little bit different than some local jobs, if you will. Airlines are laser focused on safety. The crew and the crew of the airline is primarily there for your safety. So they need those people in, they need them trained, they need them certified, that sort of thing. So they're going to have to ramp up. We are starting to see cancellations across some airlines. You may have seen some reports this week about having to cancel because they didn't have the crew available. So it's going to take a little while for that to happen. Hopefully that will recover fairly quickly. But that's also one of the reasons that we've got new airlines. There were crew that were released and are available, so there are new airlines coming in with some of those experienced crew members. I think it will recover, but it's going to take time, and we've seen that in other segments of the economy as well.
Yeah, and there's still some crew members and with some of the airlines that are still on leave that they have not brought back yet.
Right.
So there's still, I guess you could say, they're trying to manage that with the monies that they have. So I think that there is some staff that they still have not tapped into that they can as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. But Benita asked how much of the fleet of the airlines are actually in the air. So going back to that supply demand question.
I actually don't have the operational numbers here in front of me. I know airlines are trying to bring back most of the equipment as quickly as possible, but I do think the crew is going to be the bottleneck there versus just aircraft availability. So I think it's going to take a while for that to come back, but unfortunately I don't have the actual numbers in front of me for aircraft.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to, Chuck, if you could share that with us, we'd be happy to get it out to the audience afterwards and share that information with them. Well, seeing no more questions, that means, Chuck, you did a fantastic job of sharing information and updates, so we greatly appreciate it. Oh no, one more. Michael Wright says, can you give us an update/timeline of when you expect ARC to integrate with NDC?
Interesting question. We have a number of carriers that are already implementing NDC with ARC. British Airways was one of the first that came across as working with us on the NDC platform. We have a number of other carriers that are working to implement their NDC capabilities with ARC. In fact, I have two people in the office with me today that are working on NDC implementations. So that is happening as we speak. We are implementing airlines just as quickly as we can and as quickly as they're available to invest in the technology to do that. So ARC is doing that today and we'll continue to do that.
And for those that don't know, could you explain what NDC is?
Here's a loaded question.
Just trying to let everyone know.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We're running up on the top of the hour, so I'd love to answer that. No. NDC stands for New Distribution Capability, and historically, airline distribution has been basically, here's a seat, here's a price, buy it. NDC allows airlines to provide a lot more capabilities and a lot more information about amenities that are available, as well as the offer for a particular product. So a product on one airline may be different than a product on another airline. So NDC allows that sort of thing to be communicated across a number of different channels. So it wouldn't necessarily be only available on an airline website. It could be available across other channels as well. And that allows airlines to distribute their products and information about those products much more quickly and get the right offers to the right passengers at the right time.
It's a very good way of explaining it. Thank you, Chuck. Kathleen France, and I'll wrap up with this question. She's asking about passport delays and renewing it, and also getting through customs. So if I know it's not exactly your bailiwick, but if you have anything on that front.
Honestly, I don't. I have not been kind of in the loop on the airline or passenger processing at the airports, so really don't have much information on that one.
Yeah, and Kathleen, I'd say that goes straight through the State Department and also TSA, so and Customs and Border Patrol. So that would be something I would reach out to them for. And happy, if you want to email me offline, happy to connect you to some of those people if you have any issues that or any questions that you'd like to talk to them about. But with that, Chuck, thank you again so much. We will get, again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be on the SCAL USA website. Thank you all for tuning in today. As Jim mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we will have our next webinar coming up on July 14th with Roger Dow and Christine Duffy, the President and CEO of Carnival Cruise Lines. We'll have a brief cruise update on where that cruise industry is, followed by an update on US travel and everything going on advocacy-wise. Jim, I'd like to invite you back just to give a quick wrap up and tell us anything else.
I pretty much wrapped it up. Then we're going to.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Basically, thank you everybody for tuning in today, and let others know that it will be on our scalusa.org website. Chuck, thank you. Very informative. Things keep evolving, getting better. Right now, supply and demand is a big question mark when the flight crews will be back and get more aircraft in the air, So, as someone who has traveled twice in the last few weeks, the airports are full, the flights are full. And as an ex-airline guy, I'm very thrilled to see it all. But thank you very much. Thanks, Morgan. Another great job. And everybody stay well.